There is a specific kind of money stress that doesn't go away when things get better. The month you finally have a little breathing room, it's still there. The week after you pay something off, it's still there. The morning after you told yourself last night that you'd stop worrying, it's still there. And that's the part nobody seems to have an explanation for. Because the explanation you've probably been working with, that you're stressed because your finances are stressful, doesn't account for why the feeling stays when the stress is supposed to be lower. It doesn't account for the dread that shows up before you've even looked at anything. It doesn't account for the way a single notification from your bank can ruin a morning that had nothing to do with money. If that's a pattern you recognize, this video is specifically about what's actually happening there, not the surface version, the real one. By the end of this, you'll have an accurate name for what you've been living. You'll understand why it compounds over time, why it gets worse, not better, even when your situation isn't getting worse. And you'll have one specific thing you can do today that begins to interrupt it. So let's start with the first thing worth naming. Financial anxiety is not the same thing as being stressed about money. Those two things feel similar from the inside, but they are not the same mechanism, and that distinction matters more than almost anything else in this video. Being stressed about money is proportional. Something specific is wrong or tight or uncertain, and your nervous system responds to that specific thing. When the thing resolves, the stress resolves with it. That's a normal stress response. It's unpleasant, but it's doing its job. Financial anxiety doesn't work that way. Financial anxiety is a state, a chronic activation of your threat detection system around money that, once it's running, operates largely independently of what's actually happening in your account. The research on this is consistent across multiple fields: behavioral finance, clinical psychology, neuroscience of threat response. What it shows, again and again, is that financial anxiety has its own architecture. It has triggers that aren't always logical. It has an avoidance pattern that feels protective and makes things worse. And it has a self-sustaining quality, a loop that keeps it running long after the original stressor has changed or passed. Here's what that means practically. It means the anxiety you're carrying right now is probably not a proportional response to your current financial situation. It's a response that was calibrated at some point, maybe years ago, maybe in childhood, maybe during a genuinely terrible financial period you've since moved through, and the calibration never updated. The smoke alarm is still going off. The fire it was responding to may have changed significantly, but no one sent the signal that it was safe to stop. And here's the part that most explanations skip entirely. A lot of people in this situation have never given themselves permission to call what they're carrying anxiety, because anxiety, in the cultural script, requires a real enough reason. And if you earn enough to technically be okay, if there's no single catastrophic thing you can point to, it can feel like you don't qualify. Like the stress is your fault, not a response. Like you should be able to think your way out of it because smart people who work hard and make decent money don't get to be this afraid. That belief that you need a real enough reason is part of what keeps the loop running. And it is the first thing that needs to be updated. Now, if financial anxiety is a loop, what does the loop actually look like? Because understanding the mechanism is the thing that changes how you relate to it. Here's the sequence. It starts with a trigger, not necessarily a crisis. Sometimes it's a number. Sometimes it's a conversation. Sometimes it's nothing you can name. Just a Tuesday afternoon when the awareness of the debt sits heavier than usual. The trigger activates the threat response. Your nervous system registers money equals danger. And the way a brain that has learned money is dangerous responds to that signal is not open the app, look at the numbers, make a plan. The response is avoidance. Don't look, don't calculate, don't open the statement. Because looking feels like confirmation of something you don't want confirmed. And avoidance, in the short term, works. The dread drops slightly. The discomfort decreases. The nervous system gets a small signal that the threat has been managed. Except it hasn't been managed, it's been postponed. And in the gap where the actual information would have been, the real numbers, the actual picture, your brain fills in something. Usually something worse than reality, usually a vague, formless sense of impending catastrophe that is harder to address than any specific number would have been. So the next time a trigger appears, the threat feels slightly larger. The avoidance response fires slightly faster. The loop tightens. This is why financial anxiety gets worse in good months. It's not responding to your bank balance. It's responding to a threat signal that your nervous system has been running for a long time, and that signal doesn't update automatically when the balance improves. The loop is self-sustaining. The anxiety produces avoidance. The avoidance produces incomplete information. Incomplete information amplifies the threat signal. The amplified threat signal produces more anxiety. And somewhere in that loop, a belief forms. Not a conscious one. Not something you would necessarily say out loud, but a belief that operates like a fact. Money is dangerous. I cannot handle it. And looking will only confirm that. That belief is the engine of the loop. And here is what research on avoidance behavior consistently shows about that engine. The longer it runs without interruption, the more automatic it becomes. The more automatic it becomes, the more it feels like personality, like a fixed feature of who you are, rather than what it actually is, which is a learned pattern that learned patterns can be unlearned. Which brings us to something critical. At some point for most people carrying this, and this happens gradually, almost invisibly, the pattern becomes a verdict. It moves from "I avoid looking at my finances" to "I am someone who cannot handle money," from "I feel anxious about debt" to "I am bad with money," from a description of behavior to a description of self. And once it's a description of self, something important shifts, because you don't try to solve what is simply who you are. You manage it, you hide it, you perform competence around it for everyone who doesn't know, but you don't genuinely try to change it, because changing it would require believing the change is possible. Here's what that identity verdict is actually made of. It is not an observation. It is a conclusion assembled from a specific sequence of experiences, most of which have explanations that have nothing to do with your character. The financial patterns you inherited from a household where money was always scarce or always secret. The student loans you took at 18, when no one translated what compound interest would actually cost on the salary you'd realistically earn. The years when the math didn't work, not because of choices, but because wages and cost of living stopped moving in the same direction. The anxiety response that made you avoid instead of act. The avoidance that made things harder. The harder things that confirmed the belief. This is the real enough reason question answered. You don't need a catastrophic financial history to develop financial anxiety. You need a nervous system that learned somewhere along the way that money is a source of danger. And nervous systems are very good at learning that lesson. They are not very good at unlearning it on their own. Financial anxiety is not a reflection of who you are with money. It is what happens to a brain that learned money is dangerous and never received the signal that the danger had passed. The loop you've been living inside, the avoidance, the dread, the partial information, the tightening, that is the mechanism. Not a moral failing, not evidence of fundamental incompetence. A mechanism. And mechanisms, this is the part that matters. Mechanisms can be interrupted, not fixed overnight, not resolved by finally caring enough. Interrupted, one small signal at a time, telling the nervous system, the threat has been seen, and you don't have to protect me from it anymore. This is not who you are. This is what happened to you. And understanding that difference, really understanding it, not just saying it, is the first shift. If what this video is describing feels like something you want to go deeper into, not just understand, but actually start to work through, there's a resource in the description called The Financial Shame Reset. It's a guided workbook built specifically around what this video covers: the psychological architecture of financial anxiety, and the specific exercises adapted from cognitive behavioral therapy that begin to interrupt the loop. It's designed to be worked through privately, at your own pace without anyone watching. If this video opens something, that's where the next layer is. Link is in the description. Now let's talk about what actually interrupts it. Because this is the place where most explanations leave you. They name the pattern, which is useful, and then they say something like, track your spending. Make a budget, face your finances. And if you've tried that, if you've downloaded the app, made the spreadsheet, opened the statement with the best intentions, and found that it didn't change the dread the way it was supposed to, this is what happened. Those actions address the surface. They don't address the loop. Here's the thing about what actually interrupts a threat response. It is not information. It is not willpower. It is not finally caring enough or finally being ready. What interrupts a threat response is a signal. A small, repeated, consistent signal that the threat can be looked at without the looking being dangerous. That is a different thing than having a budget. That is the nervous system learning, slowly and with repetition, that opening the app does not destroy you, that the number, whatever it is information, not confirmation of a verdict about who you are. Now, a word on the but my finances actually are a problem. Objection. Because that's real. The situation many people are in is genuinely difficult. The debt is real. The gap between income and cost of living is real. The specific math of student loans and stagnant wages and the cost of existing right now, that is real. And nothing in this video is suggesting otherwise. Both things are true. The situation is real. And the anxiety response is making it harder to address the situation. Not because anxiety makes you weak, but because a brain in threat mode is not a brain that can plan clearly. The avoidance that feels protective is the thing that keeps the situation from being addressable. Interrupting the loop doesn't fix the finances. It creates the conditions under which the finances can actually be looked at, thought through, and moved on. One step for this week. Not a system. Not a plan. Not a commitment to track everything from now on. One step. Go to your bank app or your account online and look at one number. Not all of them, one. Your current checking balance or the balance on the account that causes the most dread. Look at it. Write it down on a piece of paper. That's it. Don't calculate. Don't plan. Don't spiral. One number written down. What you're doing when you do that is sending the first signal. The threat has been seen. The looking did not destroy you. That is what the loop interruption starts with. One number, one signal, one step. If this opens something you want to go deeper on, the resource in the description is built exactly for that next layer. The exercises that take what you now understand and begin to make it real. Link is in the description and also in the pinned comment. What's the moment you realized what you were carrying was more than just stress about money? Drop it in the comments, because more people need to read that than you might think. So here is what's different now than when this started. Financial anxiety has a name, not a vague name, a specific one. It is a chronic activation of your threat detection system around money, running a loop of avoidance and amplification that sustains itself independently of what's actually in your account. That is not a character description. That is a mechanism. And now the why it gets worse question has an answer. It gets worse when the loop runs without interruption. When avoidance keeps the threat signal running, when the avoiding compounds into a story about who you are. It gets worse not because you are getting worse. It gets worse because the loop hasn't been interrupted yet. The fact that it's gotten worse doesn't mean you're getting worse. It means the loop has been running and you now know what the interruption looks like. One number written down this week. Not a system, not a plan, not a promise to do it differently from now on. One signal to your nervous system that the threat can be looked at and that the looking is survivable. That's where it starts. Not with discipline, not with finally being ready, with one small signal that changes what the brain believes is possible. Anyone who's been carrying this knows how long it can go unnamed. How long you can walk around with something this specific, this exhausting, and have no language for it except, I'm just bad with money, or I'm just stressed. You're not just stressed. This has a name. And it is not who you are. It is what happened to you. And that, however small it sounds, is the part that changes first.